SABC News presentation.
Good evening and welcome to Interface. My name is Thembisa. Tonight on Interface, prospects for unemployed South Africans are looking even bleaker following the recent announcement of the quarterly labour force survey. According to the survey, 25.2% of South Africans between the ages of 15 and 64 are unemployed. Experts say job creation has failed to keep pace with the influx of new entrants into the market. Statistician General Lehohla and Peter Aling, the Director of Profits Analytics, will help us unpack these statistics in a short while. But first, let's take a quick look at this insert compiled by Stefina Komane.
4.6 million South Africans are without jobs. While Statistics South Africa is convinced that the situation is improving, it's little consolation for those that are unemployed.
I've been looking for a job here at the robots, and I've been getting piece jobs. 1 month you get a piece job, and the next month nothing. But the landlord wants his rent. When you explain that you didn't get jobs, he kicks you out. That's why you see people sleeping on the streets.
I have been unemployed for 10 years now. I wake up every morning and come here to look for piece jobs.
But Statistics South Africa says the economy is creating new jobs. For example, 54,000 people were employed in agriculture between January and March. 29,000 people also found work as domestic workers, and a further 50,000 people found jobs in municipalities, manufacturing, and even in the mines. However, 100,000 new job seekers entered the market and could not find work, resulting in a slight increase in the official unemployment rate.
So unemployment is not necessarily unexpected. It's grown by about 100,000 people, 4.6 million people now unemployed instead of 4.5 million last quarter. However, employment overall has increased from what the losses we got of 1 million people by 2008. Now you see about 646,000 people being employed.
A big concern is 75% of the 4.6 million job seekers in the country are uneducated young people with no matric qualification.
When we look at unemployment and focus on it, it's largely for people who do not have matric. So education actually counts. So the source of unemployment is known, that the uneducated and the young do not get jobs. But when you are uneducated and you are young and you grow into old age still uneducated, you'll never get a job. The prospect for getting jobs demonstrate that you are not less likely to get a job.
With unemployment on the increase and more job seekers entering the unemployment market daily, the latest figures present little hope for many South Africans hoping to participate in the economy.
So as we saw there, Lehohla is the Statistician General, and he joins us tonight on Interface. And we're also joined by Peter Aling, who is a labour analyst with Profit Analytics. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us. These numbers get a little bit confusing, Mr. Lehohla, and you know, you hear there's 25.2% of unemployed South Africans, and then you hear there's 36.7%. Is that a quarterly figure versus an annual figure, or is there a different definition attached to each of these numbers?
Well, there are standards that you apply for measuring unemployment. It must be somebody who was looking for a job and will be available to undertake a job. So using that definition, which is an ILO definition, International Labour Organization definition that is adopted by all countries, we find that 25.2% of those who are looking for jobs, or the 25.2% as the unemployment rate for South Africa. There is an expanded definition which comes to about 36%. That you get when you add people who are called discouraged job seekers, which come to about 2.3 million South Africans who, because of job search costs, they are not able and continue to look for work. But they say, if a job presents itself, I'll take it. So high regime unemployment environments have these kinds of two definitions. The one which is the official definition, 25.2, and then of course the expanded, which is 36.2.
And of course you've got the employed sector versus the formal employment sector versus the informal sector, and you peg that number at 2.2 million.
Yes, 2.2 million in the informal sector and 9.
And there's always disputes.
And then the domestic.
There's always a dispute around the figure of unemployed, of people in the informal sector. How do you arrive at that number?
The quarterly labor force survey is generated out of a household survey program. That is, you go to households and ask questions about who is employed and who is unemployed. And this is done every quarter on a continuous basis. It is households based because if you do not undertake it that way, or you think you can get it from the employers, you will not get the denominators and you will not catch those that are unemployed. So you run this on the basis of a scientific process of drawing a sample of 30,000 households across the country, and you sample such that you get urban, rural, you get a good mix of race, and then at the end, and then of course you get a good combination of province and district and so on. So out of that sample, which is a very scientific stratified sample, you then get these results quarter on quarter. And the most important thing is that you actually track the same households for 3 quarters, and then you rotate them out you rotate 25% every quarter. So you got a longitudinal survey visiting the same household and getting changing performance in the labor market per household. So it's a very, very robust method that we use to collect these numbers.
What do you say to companies like AdCorp that are doing a similar kind of thing to what you're doing in terms of crunching the numbers, and they say your numbers are completely unreliable?
AdCorp, the problem is they get data from administrative sources. So it would necessarily exclude people who are not, who are in households and are not in the administrative source. And besides, AdCorp would be using the only data that they have would be of those firms that are under their grouping. The other bit that is very, very difficult and very dangerous, which causes a moral hazard, is when you are a recruitment agency and you are measuring employment. You cannot do both at the same time. Stats says sole mandate is just to measure. There is no interest, no vested interest whatsoever in the environment except
so you stick by your numbers.
Except using good methods.
You stick by your numbers. That's
well, I wouldn't be here if I didn't stick by my numbers.
Peter, let's bring you in here. Do you buy the numbers that Stats SA is churning out?
In the formal economy, I'd agree with those numbers completely, and I think, you know, economically speaking, it's the informal economy that creates this question mark. The problem with it is that it's incredibly difficult to debate because it's inherently difficult to measure. There are proxies that you can utilize to measure the informal sector outside of a survey, outside of the labour force survey, where potentially people wouldn't categorize themselves as employed if they're creating a job for themselves, or they're employed in the informal sector, or they have a incentive not to report that they're working if it's in the informal sector that's not the measured economy. Those proxies, the two that I've seen come out of AdCorp, which are sensible to me, is to measure the amount of cash in the economy. The interesting thing is that cash in circulation in the economy has been increasing over the last 10 years, despite numerous alternatives to cash, credit cards, electronic transactions, and this has been published in American journals. In fact, the top-rated economics journal in the world as a measure, as a proxy for the measurement of the informal economy.
So that's, to you, is a sign that there are more people in the informal economy than what Stats SA is saying.
Yes, that's one. So if you look at that cash in circulation as a percentage of GDP, it indicates that potentially the informal sector is up to 10% higher than represented by the quarterly labour force survey. I don't think that it's Stats SA misrepresenting the numbers. I simply think that the quarterly labour force survey might not be identifying certain components of the informal economy. And the other thing that I think what people don't realise is we talk, so if you increase the size of the informal economy, unemployment is not as much of a problem in South Africa. It's still just as much of a problem, because anyone who's employed in that informal economy is not protected by labour legislation. They're not protected by minimum wage provisions. They're working for whatever they can get. What we'd like to see is the formal economy expanding rather than the informal economy expanding.
What's your response to that? That, you know, the informal sector is actually much larger than what you guys say?
No, not. I would say no, that's not true. The instruments of measurement are based on households. And people report on what they do, and we follow these households, and the power of this is being a longitudinal survey. So you cannot say that because there's so much cash in the economy, then that's an indication of the informal sector. People who are engaged in an economic activity, and the list of questions that we engage these people in finding out what exactly they are doing, in and out, year in, year out, attests to the level of economic activity. Yes, people may be skeptical why you want to ask me about my job. Those people that are in the informal sector are not people who will escape tax. It is those in the formal sector that may wish to escape tax and all other things. So there isn't any indicator that there is deception at the level of the informal sector, including in terms of people identify themselves as foreign nationals. They actually are very articulate on this. And this is confirmed also by the figures that we get in the census.
All right, we've got to take a short break. What do you think of the stats that we've just received from Stats SA? Do give us your thoughts on our Facebook page, Interface on SABC3, and also on our SMS line, 33726. We're back after this. Welcome back to Interface. Let's give you a full picture of what the job situation in the country looks like. Let's take a look at this quick graphic. It just shows the number of people, Stats SA says, are unemployed in the first quarter of 2013. That number is at 4.6 million people. Discouraged work seekers, those are people that have been looking for jobs and have just given up, and they are at 2.3 million people. The number of people who are not economically active at all are at around 12.7 million, and the employed are 13.6 million in South Africa. So that means that we lost about 25,000 people in the formal sector and also 13,000 people in the informal sector. And as we said in the beginning, the situation is quite dire. And as you're looking at that graphic, let me just ask you, Mr. Lehohla, why is it that we are losing so many people when the efforts of government are increasing in trying to get more people employed? Where's the disconnect?
Well, I wouldn't know where the disconnect is, but you have to look at the performance of the economy more generally. If you look at the GDP, gross domestic product growth over the quarters, it has been very, very slow at about less than 3%. And this is lower than the years, the 2005 to 2008, where we are inching towards 6%. So the impact should be seen in the GDP. Consumer price index has remained quite benign, below the 5%, and it's been so like for a long period of time. So private sector has to probably said to be the one that has to create jobs. Government could facilitate the environment within which jobs may be created. But in the main, the gross domestic product, the growth engine, is the one that may indicate whether jobs can be created or not created. And that indicator remains stubbornly low.
Okay. And Peter, what are your thoughts? I mean, where is the problem? Because if you chat to the guys at the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, they say it's the strikes, it's the stringent labor laws in this country. What is the problem in your view?
I'd agree with those things. I think the private sector is inherently labor averse. I think that the legislative framework, in fact, we're introducing more restrictive labor legislation, In international rankings, we now have the worst ranking in terms of employer-employee relations. Inherently combative. If you were starting a business and you had a choice between employing machinery or employing people, you'd go for machinery every time in the South African case. And this is what we see companies doing. Companies continue to post profits year in and year out, yet employment is declining. And it's because companies are looking for ways to replace labor with technology and machinery. And if you look at, I agree with Pali, if you look at what's driving unemployment in South Africa, it's definitely those low-skilled jobs that are at risk. It's definitely in relation to economic activity or the GDP. Because if we look at the job losses in the last quarter, it was all those cyclical sectors that are driven by the economy as a whole. So it was retail and wholesale trade, it was finance, it was construction sector that lost just over 40,000 jobs. Those sectors are linked to the economic cycle. You need economic growth, you need growing economic activity to create employment in those areas where low-skilled individuals actually have the opportunity to get work.
And every time we chat about unemployment in this country, we always make the point that government can only facilitate and create an environment within which employment can thrive, but it's actually the private sector that should be driving that employment. And you've made that point as well tonight, Pali. And yet we see government being the biggest employer. Why is that?
Well, government needs a minimum infrastructure to perform those kinds of functions.
But 44,000 more jobs in the first quarter?
Well, I mean, if you are facing a specter of joblessness, you have to do something about it, and the public works program and all other things that the government have to do will have to do. Also, I mean, there are parastatal bodies that government is investing in, which are also doing part of private sector work. And those are the areas, in some instances, where jobs could be created. So you will see that area of government and parastatals creating those kinds of jobs. But generally, it must be the private sector that actually creates.
Are we not missing it here, Peter? If we have the government employing 44,000 more people in the first quarter of 2013, at a time when the tech space in South Africa is exhausted. We're being taxed for everything, and yet we need to support even more government employees. Surely that's not sustainable.
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head when you said that the government have been the primary contributor to employment growth. If you take out government employment, the situation looks a lot worse than it is. To be honest, the government are responsible to a large extent for the emerging black middle class over the last 15 years, and I think that has to stop at some point. Agreed. You can't continue to grow government without an underlying infrastructure that supports economic growth in the country, and at some point the private sector have to pick up that slack. It's actually the responsibility of the private sector and private enterprise to create jobs, not government.
So what's wrong with the private sector in South Africa? Why are they not coming to the party as they should?
Well, it's not that the economy doesn't have the ability to create jobs. In the last quarter, 199,000 high-skilled jobs were created. It's that the type of jobs that the private sector demands are not what's being supplied by the education system in South Africa. And we can go back to it, but at some point it has to change, that the caliber of school leavers and the number of school leavers and tertiary leavers are fit to meet the requirements of the private sector. We need more professionals, more management level individuals, not more unskilled labor, which are ultimately going to be marginalized by technology in the long run in any case.
And in fact, that's the point you made in the package that we played.
Yes, indeed. I mean, education, I would argue, is the key to this. And something has to be done there, because otherwise these people will stay in that period for about 40 years until they get pensionable, or at least they get a state grant. So it's a spectre that one shudders to contemplate in the long run. There has to be education. People have to be kept longer in education. It must be high quality education. It cannot be a maths literacy kind of education. It has to be hard-nosed, and performance must be exacted out of the system, particularly in the face of the amount that is spent per capita on education itself.
On education.
So it's not the absence of fiscus to educate, but it is the ability
And I know you,
Yes.
you crunch the numbers, the two of you crunch the numbers, but I do want to get your thoughts on what more we need to do on the education side. You know, what should be done in this country? How do we get out of the rut that we are in terms of employment and education? But we're going to have to do that right after this break. And we're loving your Facebook comments and also your SMSs. Do keep them coming. Let's just have a quick look at some of them. Dr. Lisiba Lamula says, why is South Africa's unemployment rate increasing every year? I mean, ever since I was born, I never heard of the statistics saying that South Africa's unemployment rate had actually decreased. And Blanche Kermis says, from an idealistic perspective, one would raise a point that government should not always be held accountable for every single problem in South Africa. However, when it comes to job creation, unfortunately, I personally feel that government structures carry so much of the responsibility. Spusiso Busakwe says, government has failed us, and my point of view has not changed on that. Swonko Sidlamuga says South Africans are lazy and they don't want to look for other avenues when it comes to jobs. And we have Johan Mare who says for every one new job created, the population increases by 3. So there is the problem. These are some of the comments that we're getting. Are they hitting the nerve? Are they going towards the line of where the problem is, in your view?
I think they're comments on the problem. I'm not sure that they provide any solutions, but I think they are an indication of how frustrated South Africans are to continually hear the bad news around employment and the economy. And I mean, if you want a quick fix, you asked about how to fix education,
yes.
for example. I think it's not just an education-based thing. I think the solution, outside of being really drastic and doing away with minimum wages so that the economy would absorb people, is to do away with the collective, the idea that labor must all be treated equally and treat every person as an individual with individual measurements, individual performance evaluations, and individual performance assessments.
But we know that employers don't always have our best interests at heart as employees, so that opens us up to abuse.
How? I mean, the reality in the education sector at the moment is that teachers are not evaluated in any way. Now, I understand that being evaluated as a teacher might be a scary thing because you're not then guaranteed the same increases year in and year out. But the reality, particularly if you work in the government sector, is that you are expected to provide a service to the students who you are meant to be educating.
Yes, but what I'm saying is if we don't have the collective structures, we are not able to bargain collectively, we're not able to raise our grievances collectively.
I think in terms of those type of collective structures, I think collective bargaining in the sense that minimum wages or minimum increases might be done through that thing. But I think if you look at the individuality, self-interest would drive far higher levels of productivity than the collective.
What are your thoughts, Mr. Lehohla?
Well, I crunch numbers. I don't have any policy view on matters, but I think we really need to look for the long haul. I think the problem is much bigger. We need to invest in education and invest appropriately, train people well, particularly in the trades. Like welding, electricians, and so on. We lost that competitive edge, and we need to reintroduce
regain
those
that.
things,
The targets that we've set for ourselves, I mean, the target of reducing unemployment to about 14% by 2020, is that even a realistic target given the numbers that you've given us?
I suppose it's still achievable to do so within the number of years that is remaining towards that period. The thing is to start now. If we still have people doing maths literacy and not going into the trades in a big way, we'll always have this kind of problem.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming through to talk to us about this issue. And I know it's an emotional one because a lot of us are looking for jobs out there. Do keep looking, and hopefully you will find those jobs. And do keep your thoughts coming on our Facebook page and also on our email address. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.